The heavy oak doors of the courtroom swung open with a rhythmic creak that seemed to echo the gravity of the law itself. Inside the hallowed halls of Judy Justice, the air was thick with the scent of old paper and the silent expectations of those seeking a resolution to their earthly disputes. It was a place where stories collided, where the truth was a treasure to be unearthed through the careful sifting of words and emotions. The gavel sat silently upon the bench, a symbol of finality waiting to be claimed by the hand of authority. In the center of this legal arena stood the figures of a family divided, their lives intertwined by blood and marriage, yet separated by a chasm of misunderstanding and past grievances. Miss Lucretia Gaines, a woman of formidable presence and protective instincts, stood on one side, her eyes reflecting a mixture of weariness and determination. She was there to sue her former brother-in-law, Mr. Dwight Francis, alleging assault and a false arrest that had left scars deeper than the skin. Opposite her stood Mr. Francis, a man smaller in stature, but firm in his conviction that he was the one who had been wronged. The court officer called the room to order with a voice that commanded immediate respect. "All rise," he proclaimed, and the small crowd stood as Judge Judy moved toward her bench. Her presence was a force of nature, honed by 50 years of navigating the complex labyrinth of human behavior and legal statutes. She took her seat, her eyes scanning the room with a sharp, perceptive gaze that could see through the layers of pretense. "Hello, Judge," the voices murmured in unison. Case number 3030, Gaines versus Francis, was officially underway. The judge looked at Miss Gaines and inquired about the woman standing beside her. "This is my witness, my twin sister, Lucinda Gaines," Lucretia replied. The bond between the two women was evident in the way they stood, a mirror image of support and shared history. Lucinda had been married to the defendant, but that chapter of her life had recently closed with divorce finalized on August 18th, 2022. However, the shadows of the past reached back to November of 2020, a time when the marriage was crumbling and the air was thick with tension. The judge began her inquiry, establishing the context of the long-standing conflict. It was clear that the relationship between Lucinda and Dwight had been fraught with difficulty long before the day in question. Lucinda had previously shared her fears with Lucretia, claiming that Dwight was attempting to orchestrate her downfall by alleging domestic violence. On the 8th of November, 2020, the sisters were engaged in one of their frequent telephone conversations. They were laughing and chatting about their schoolwork, discussing the upcoming tests that weighed on their minds. It was a mundane, peaceful moment, two sisters finding solace in each other's company amid the stresses of academic life. For over an hour, they shared their thoughts and dreams, unaware that the tranquility was about to be shattered by a sudden intrusion of reality. Suddenly, the tone of the call shifted. Lucretia recounted hearing a voice in the background, a voice she identified as Dwight's. He spoke words that chilled her to the bone. "Let us fight," he had said. "Let us do this without the police. We could fight right now." The repetition of the challenge echoed through the phone line, a spark that threatened to ignite a fire. Lucretia, alarmed by the sudden escalation, asked her sister who was there. When Lucinda confirmed it was Dwight, Lucretia felt a wave of concern. Yet, in a moment of hesitation, she decided to hang up, thinking it was a private matter between a husband and wife that they might handle on their own. She promised to call back, a decision she would later question as events took a turn for the worse. 20 minutes passed, a period of time that felt like an eternity as the silence from her sister's end grew more ominous. Lucretia called repeatedly, her anxiety mounting with every unanswered ring. She knew that Dwight had previously had Lucinda arrested for domestic violence in October 2020, and the fear that history was repeating itself gripped her heart. When Lucinda finally answered, her voice was heavy with resignation. "I am going to jail now because he called the police," she told her sister. Lucretia, driven by a primal need to protect her family, decided she had to go to the house. Her primary concern was her nephew, the young child caught in the middle of this domestic storm. She remembered a previous occasion when her sister had been unable to return home and Dwight had purportedly failed to provide for the boy. With a heavy heart and a mind filled with worry, Lucretia drove toward the residence. When she arrived, she saw no police cars, only Dwight standing outside the home. The scene was set for a confrontation that neither was prepared to de-escalate. Lucretia got out of her car, her emotions agitated by the events of the day. She approached Dwight and asked him why he continued to call the police on her sister. What happened next became a point of fierce contention. Lucretia claimed that Dwight, without provocation, struck her in the face, knocking her off the curb and onto the concrete. She described a scene of being trapped and overwhelmed, with Dwight allegedly continuing to strike her as she tried to shield herself. She spoke of losing consciousness and pointed to the cuts on her knuckles as evidence of her attempt to defend herself from the onslaught. However, Judge Judy, with her decades of experience, looked at the evidence with a more critical eye. She examined the injuries Lucretia described, noting that cuts on the knuckles are often indicative of striking someone rather than a purely defensive posture. The judge listened as Dwight presented his version of the story. He claimed that he had been the one trying to avoid a fight, stepping outside to call police and waiting for their arrival. He described a car speeding around the corner, and Lucretia emerging, ready for a confrontation. According to Dwight, Lucretia was the one who initiated the physical struggle, knocking him over before he managed to escape and head toward the direction of a nearby hospital. The turning point of the trial arrived when the judge reviewed the official police report from that day. The document contained a narrative that contradicted Lucretia's testimony in a significant way. According to the report, when the officers arrived, they found the parties on Kensington Street. The report stated that after an initial altercation, Dwight had attempted to walk away, heading toward Chapel Street. Crucially, the report noted that Lucretia admitted to the police at the time that she had run after him, continuing the fight until the authorities intervened. This revelation changed the entire complexion of the case. It suggested that even if Dwight had been the first to strike, he had attempted to withdraw from the conflict, and Lucretia had chosen to pursue him. The judge paused, allowing the weight of this information to settle over the courtroom. She looked at Lucretia, who was struggling to maintain her composure, her voice rising in protest as she denied the account in the police report. Lucretia spoke of her injuries, specifically a torn meniscus in her knee, arguing that it would have been physically impossible for her to chase anyone down the street. Yet, the judge had observed Lucretia walking into the courtroom, and she noted that her behavior during the trial was marked by an inability to control her impulses. Time and again, Lucretia interrupted, spoke over the judge, and allowed her anger to dictate her actions. In the eyes of the law, the concept of the aggressor is vital. The judge explained that Lucretia had intentionally entered a volatile situation, arriving at a place where she knew a protective order was in place, and where tensions were already at a breaking point. While her desire to help her sister and nephew was understandable, her method of doing so was fraught with legal and personal peril. Common sense, the judge noted, must always be coupled with the law. By pursuing Dwight down the street after the initial encounter had ended, Lucretia had shifted from a victim to an active participant in a street